right, we're on to part 6 of our chapter 17 genetic slides. Now, some genes interact with others, plus there are environmental effects, and I will talk more about environmental effects when we talk about epigenetics later on. Now, the environment plays a role in your phenotype. In other words, you have a skin color, but that skin color can change depending on how much sun you get. That is a role of the environment. The environment can alter your phenotype. Your genes give you a general genotype, but the environment can alter that genotype and can essentially, what's going on, activate or deactivate a gene. If you get sunlight, basically you are causing an environmental change that actually turns on a gene. I mentioned this in plants a while ago in one of the other videos, but in this particular case, this is a case where you do not produce the pigment if you are light-skinned unless you go out in the sun and the sun, the actual UV radiation, activates the gene and you make more pigment, so you get darker to protect yourself. Now, the reason for this is that the pigment is expensive and your body tends to not make as much. If you can get away with making less of something, then it will. Now, actually, it's thought that people who moved north and didn't get enough sunlight, because UV radiation is actually needed to produce vitamin D in your skin. So it's thought as people moved north away from the equator, they got lighter skinned so that basically they could get more sunlight and make more vitamin D. If you lived near the tropics or where there was a lot more sunlight, then you tended to have darker skin. So this explains the genetics of skin color. But ultimately, this is a great example of how the environment can alter your skin color. Everybody, regardless of your skin color, which version of the gene you have, when you are exposed to UV radiation, you produce more pigment, you become darker, regardless of your initial skin color. So environment makes you darker, just plain and simple, by activating the gene when you're exposed to ultraviolet radiation from the sun. And this is an idea that if genes are not separate from the environment interacts with the genes and can alter their efficiency, if you want to think of it that way. All right, so here we do it with plants and gene interaction, but most traits are influenced by many genes. I mentioned that hair color, for instance, was a very complex trait with about a dozen different genes affecting it. Same with eye color. The reason Mendel didn't study these genes was because it was too complex. He studied something where there was one gene and one effect. And so his were the simplest ones, but most genes are not so simple. Instead, you have many genes that interact to give you your particular phenotype. Your phenotype is not the result of just one gene. It's the interaction of several genes. Epistasis is this idea of one gene masking the expression of another gene. Very similar to your big H and your little h and your dominance, except for this may happen across two different genes. You may have one gene at a completely different place on the chromosome and maybe even on a different chromosome, but the effects of one might affect the other gene in a very similar way as our alleles did with a big H and a little h on the two homologous chromosomes. So two non-homologous chromosomes. In other words, there's 1 through 22 plus the sex-linked chromosomes, or 23. Anyways, the whole idea is these chromosomes, there are two pair of them, and they have the same gene, and they can interact by one covering up the other, as we've seen in the crosses. Well, there could be a gene on a completely different chromosome number. So chromosome 1 versus chromosome 7, and they may interact where one affects the other one, all right, and alters it in a very similar way, including the complete dominant type trait. So if you get a particular version of a gene on chromosome 3, it could affect the expression of, say, a gene you have on chromosome 1. And this is called epistasis. All right, so you know that, and learn that. Alleles of one gene can mask the expression of the alleles of another gene. And this is including the homozygous ones, the big H, little h. But it can occur on two completely separate loci, two completely separate traits, characters, I should say, at a different place on a different chromosome even. All right, you can go through this. We won't do any directly, but often this can turn out with codominance. Codominance is a common effect of this, but we don't learn it that way because codominance can also happen on the in a different manner. So, but keep that in mind that multiple genes can affect different loci. Just know that it happens. I'm not going to ask you any huge questions on that. Just know that that epistasis is a thing, and it can happen in a couple of different ways, both on a homozygous gene, homozygous chromosomes, and on heterozygous or on non-identical chromosomes or you would call it heterogeneous chromosomes, like chromosome 2 and chromosome 10, and just know that epistasis exists. And that would also explain codominance. Let's see, anything else here? I don't think so. So this is a short one. Just know that these exist.